Hello, everybody. Sorry we're late. We had some technical difficulties. I don't think I'm going to use the chair. But we're here. So praise the Lord. We got here, and we got the camera set up. We got a mic. I'm sorry if I'm a little quiet. We will try to fix that. If not, I'll try to speak loud. And if you guys can let me know when I need to stop speaking loud. If not, I will just act like my dad. Okay, so we are in 1 Kings. We're going to start in chapter 1 because I figured that was a good place to start. But we're going to go over the outline really quickly. And then the timeline and stuff like that. So is now a good time, or should I skip over that, Jay? To throw the outline up there. I just wanted to throw that up there really quick. Okay, so Uncle Danny, we're stuck with this. I'm sorry, but we are going to make some changes. The screen up here would not facilitate a laser because it's a TV, so we will find a solution by next week. So, 1 Kings, key word is divided. Key verse, 1 Kings 9, 3 through 7. Okay, so it's right a little bit after David. So David was 1000 BC, so this is between 1800 BC, and we're covering the first section, which is the rise and fall of Solomon, 1 through 11. Prayer of Solomon in chapter 3, temple construction, and pagan corruption, chapter 11. Probably the most important teaching in not allowing the world to give you not allowing the world to have a toehold in your life. So, chapter 1, David is old and advanced in years, and they put a covering over him. And the servant said, "Let a young woman, a virgin, be sought for the king, and let her stand before the king, and let her care for him, and let her lie in your bosom, that the Lord the king may be warm." So, I've heard a lot of commentaries talk about how this is not sexual at all, and this is not bad at all, but sure sounds sexual and bad to me. The king did not lay with her, but he was an old man, and it seems that they sought for a lovely young woman throughout all the territory of Israel, and found Abishag. Doesn't sound very lovely, but the Shushanite, and brought her to the king, and the young woman was very lovely, and she cared for the king and served him, but the king did not know her. So there was no sexual intercourse between them, but it was quite clear that the king they wanted a lovely young woman for the king. And so the only reason that I'm highlighting this and not just skipping over it is the Lord is forgiving, and I will read the verse a little bit later on. The Lord is forgiving and plentiful in mercy, willing to give forgiveness, but by no means clearing the guilty and visiting the iniquity of the fathers to the third and fourth generation. And David had a problem with adultery. And at the end of David's life, obviously this isn't condemned as sin, but this is not what I would think that the Lord would have had David do. And I could be wrong, but I think that it would have been better for David to maybe have one of his other wives care for him that wasn't young and lovely. And so the only reason I bring that up is because I want to realize that your weaknesses, if you allow weaknesses in your life, it will carry on to the next generation. So we'll skip over that. So the plot for help me out. Adonijah. There we go. Man, I wasn't reading that for some reason. Adonijah is one of the king's sons. In fact, he is the brother of Absalom. He's the younger brother of Absalom, and he was very good looking. It says Verse 6, and his father had not rebuked him at any time by saying, why have you done so? He was also very good looking. His mother had borne him after Absalom. So he's second in line after Absalom. So Abinadab, it's not Abinadab, Adonijah, sorry, it's going to take me a little bit. That name is not familiar to me. Adonijah gets together with, guess who? Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and with Abiathar the priest, and they plot together, but they didn't invite Zadok the priest or Benaiah, the son of Jeruiah. He was one of the mighty men of David. They didn't invite him to the plot or the feast or Nathan the prophet. So they decide, we're gonna make him the king, and so they put 50 men in front of him to run before him and shout out that he's the king. So they took sacrifices, verse 9, of sheep and oxen and fatted cattle by the stone of Zoeth, which is by En Rogel. He also invited all of his brothers, the king's sons, and all of Judah, the king's servants, all the men of Judah. But he did not invite Nathan the prophet. He didn't invite the prophet, the preacher, or the actual king. He had just invited, he was select. So Nathan speaks to man, I'm sorry, guys. Bathsheba. Nathan speaks to Bathsheba about this problem and says, you need to go into the king and say, O king, did you not swear to me that my descendants would sit on the throne? And so she goes in and she says, Lord, my Lord, you swore by the Lord, this is verse 17, your God, to your maidservant, saying, surely Solomon your son shall reign after me, and he shall sit on my throne. So now look, Adonijah has become king, and now, my lord the king, you do not know about it. He has sacrificed oxen and fatted cattle and sheep in abundance, and has invited all the sons of the king, Abiathar the priest, and Joab the commander of the army. But Solomon your servant he has not invited. As the Lord your king, and as for you, O Lord, O king, the eyes of all Israel are on you, that you should tell them who will sit on the throne of my lord the king after him. So David's weak, David's old, the people want security, they want to know that there's going to be another king put in place, and Adonijah takes advantage of this. But the king, Nathan, comes in and basically says the same thing. They reiterate it by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. Then King David, verse 28, answers and said, call Bathsheba to me. So she came to the king in the presence and stood before him. And the king took an oath and said, as the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life from every distress, just as I swore to you by the Lord God of Israel, saying, surely Solomon your son shall be king after me, and he shall sit on my throne in my place. So I certainly will do this. Certainly will do this day. But Bathsheba bows, and verse 33, the king also said to them, take with you the servants of the Lord, and have Solomon my son ride on my own mule, and take him down to Gihon. There let Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet anoint him king over Israel, and blow a horn, saying, long live King Solomon. Then you shall come up after him, and he shall come and sit on my throne, and he shall be king in my place. So he makes a official ceremony, proclamation. He has Solomon ride on the mule, and then he has Nathan the prophet and Zadok the priest anoint him king. And this takes care of the problem. Adonijah is having a feast, and Joab hears a sound. He's like, what's the sound? That's that trumpet. And somebody said, let's see. Then Jonathan answered and said to Adonijah, no, our Lord King David has made Solomon the king. And so Solomon is declared the king, verse 50 of chapter 1. Then Adonijah was afraid of Solomon, so he arose and went and took hold of the horns of the altar He goes into the temple, grabs the altar because he's gonna. Nobody would enter the holy place, and so he thought that it was safe in there. Which one of the future people finds out it isn't safe in there. And it was told Solomon, saying, "Indeed, Adonijah is afraid of King Solomon. For look, he has taken hold of the horns of the altar, saying, 'Let King Solomon swear to me today that he will not put his servant to death with the sword.' So Adonijah is afraid because he was trying to usurp the throne. Then Solomon said to him, 'If he proves himself a worthy man, no, not one hair of him shall fall to the earth. But if wickedness is found in him, he shall die.' So King Solomon sent to bring him down from the altar, and he came and fell down before the King Solomon. And Solomon said to him, 'Go to your house.'" Chapter 2. So David's about to die. As he drew near to death, verse 2, he says to his son, "I go the way of all the earth. Be strong, therefore, and prove yourself a man." Good words. "And keep the charge of the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes and his commandments, his judgments and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, that you may prosper in all that you do wherever you turn." Very specific commandments here. Keep the charge of the Lord, walk in his ways, keep his statutes, his commandments, his judgments, and his testimonies that are written in the law of Moses, and then you'll prosper. "That the Lord may fulfill his word which he spoke concerning me, saying, 'If your sons take heed to their way, to walk before me in truth with all their heart and with all their soul,' he said, 'you shall not lack a man on the throne of Israel.'" God made a promise to David that if your sons follow the Lord, you won't lack a man on the throne of Israel. Big verse here, verse 5. "Moreover, you know also that Joab the son of Zeruiah," what Joab the son of Zeruiah did to me, "and what he did to the two commanders of the armies of Israel, to Abner, the son of Ner, and Amasa, the son of Jether, whom he killed. And he shed the blood of war in peacetime, and put the blood of war on his belt and around his waist, and on the sandals that were on his feet. Therefore, do according to your wisdom, and do not let his gray hair go down to the grave in peace." And then he says, "Show kindness to these people. And by the way, that Benjamite Shimei that cursed me and threw rocks at me, don't let his head go down in peace either." So Joab gets literally one of David's last words is, "Kill Joab. Don't let his head go down in peace." So Joab's bitterness turns into rebellion to the king, which turns into his execution. Don't let bitterness creep into your life. Another marker there for Joab: don't be a Joab. Whenever you think about being bitter towards somebody, think about what happened to Joab. It's drinking poison. The word for bitterness is literally poisoned water. And when you have bitterness, you are literally drinking poisoned water. Don't do it. Okay. David dies. So David, verse 10, rested with his fathers and was buried in the city of David. The period that David reigned over Israel was 40 years. 7 years he reigned in Hebron, and in Jerusalem he reigned 33 years. Then Solomon sat on the throne of his father David, and his kingdom was firmly established. So remember that one of the ways that Absalom claimed the throne was that he took David's wives for himself, and then he did the wicked thing on the rooftops. But part of the claiming the throne was taking David's wives. Now, I'm not sure why Adonijah does this. It's very foolish. But Adonijah asks for the handmaid that David had at the end of his life. He goes to Bathsheba and says, "Can you ask King Solomon for the handmaid? Her name is Abishag. Let's see here. Yeah, he asked for Abishag, and he's doing it because he's scheming and he's planning, and he wants to not let go of the possibility of being king. And if he's married to one of the king's wives, then there is a possibility that he might still become king. So for some reason, Bathsheba asks Solomon for Adonijah to have this wife, and Solomon's response is very strong. Let's see. Verse 22, and King Solomon answered and said to his mother, now why do you ask Abishag the Shushanite for Adonijah? Ask for him the kingdom also. He's like, why are you asking for this? Are you asking that he be the king? Because he knew that Adonijah would have standing with the people if he had one of the king's wives. So he and my older brother for him, and for Abiathar the priest, and for Joab the son of Zeruiah the king. Then King Solomon swore by the Lord, saying, may God do so to me, and more also, if Adonijah had not spoken this word against his own life. Now therefore, as the Lord lives, who has confirmed me and set me on the throne of David my father, and who has established a house for me as he promised, Adonijah shall be put to death today. So King Solomon sent by the hand of Benaiah, the mighty man of valor of David, the son of Jehoiada, and he struck him down and he died. And so the purge begins, and Abiathar the priest kind of gets a chiding by Solomon here too, and he says, if you hadn't served my dad so well, you'd be dead too. But how about you just stop being the priest and go to your house? Joab gets the bad news, verse 28. Then the news came to Joab, for Joab had defected to Adonijah. Joab's bitterness led him to rebellion to the king, which eventually led him to defecting to the king's son that was trying to usurp the throne. Though he had not defected to Absalom, he didn't defect to Absalom, but he defected to Adonijah. So Joab fled to the tabernacle of the Lord and took hold of the horns of the altar, exactly what Adonijah does. And he's like, this is going to work. The Lord will protect me. I'll run into the house of the Lord. They won't hurt me here. Then King Solomon was told, Joab fled to the tabernacle of the Lord. There he is by the altar. Then Solomon sent Benaiah, the son of Jeruiah. This guy is quite the executioner, saying, go strike him down. So Benaiah went to the tabernacle of the Lord and said to him, thus says the king, come out. And he said, no, but I will die here. And he was right. And Benaiah brought back word to the king, saying, thus says Joab, and thus he answered me. I don't think that's actually what they said. Thus says Joab, and thus he answered me. They probably paraphrased it there. Then the king said to him, do as he said, and strike him down. I love this. He's like, okay, well, strike him down there. If he wants to die there, strike him down there. So they strike him down, and they bury him. And Solomon said, their blood shall therefore return upon the head of Joab, speaking of Amasa and Abner, and upon the head of his descendants forever. But David and his descendants, upon his house and his throne, there shall be peace forever from the Lord. So Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, went up and struck and killed him, and he was buried in his house in the wilderness. The king put Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, in his place over the army. So Benaiah becomes the commander. Now, Benaiah, again, I want to reiterate this, was one of the mighty men of David, and it doesn't really say anything of the acts he did, but he was probably a young man, younger than David, because he's still able to strike somebody down with a sword. Okay, so Shimei was the guy that threw stones at David as he was leaving Jerusalem and, cursed him because he was a descendant of Saul, a relative of Saul. And so Joab says, I'll make it really quick. Joab says, you can stay in the city, but you're not allowed to leave the city. And Shimei says, okay. Well, a couple of years later, a couple of his servants flee the city. Really smart thing to do is if your master can't leave the city and you're a servant, get out of the city and the master can't chase you. So they did, and he went after them. And Solomon said, why then have you not kept the oath of the Lord and the commandment that I gave you? The king said moreover to Shimei, you know that your heart acknowledged all the wickedness that you did to my father David. Therefore the Lord will return your wickedness on your own head. And so the king kills him. Well, the king doesn't. Guess who? Benaiah. This guy's just walking around. He's the purger of the kingdom. Okay, so chapter 3, moving along. The encroachment of sin into Solomon's life. Now, do we remember Deuteronomy 7:3? Deuteronomy 7:3. You want to write that verse down in your Bible next to this verse. Deuteronomy 7:3. Actually, let's start in verse 2. And when the Lord, your God, delivers them over to you, you shall conquer them and utterly destroy them. You shall make no covenant with them, nor show mercy to them, nor shall you take marriage with them. You shall not give your daughters to their sons, nor take their daughters for your sons. They were not supposed to be marrying the world. There was another verse that specifically said, do not marry a foreign woman. And maybe 17:13. Let me really look really quick. Oh, that's about multiplying horses. I will try to find that verse for you guys. I know it's somewhere in my notes here. We're going to come across it here in a little bit. But Solomon, chapter 3, marries an Egyptian woman. Why? Because he wants to make peace with Egypt. Now, Solomon made a treaty with Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and married Pharaoh's daughter. Then he brought her to the city of David until he had finished building his house and the house of the Lord and the wall around Jerusalem. He marries an Egyptian woman. Why? Because he wants to make peace with Egypt. Well, the world wants to make peace with us, but we are at enmity with the world. The Bible says that if we are, Ephesians 5:11. This is the cross-reference that I put for that. When you're tempted to make a treaty with the world, think about this verse and think about what Solomon did. It's not worth the sacrifice. Ephesians 5:11. And have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them. Man, I am having a doozy tonight. That's not the verse I wanted either. Let's see here. That's not it. It was it's the verse, you can look it up on your own, but it was the verse that says, do not have fellowship with the world, because fellowship with the world is enmity with God. Oh man, what was that verse? Oh, James 4:4. I'm sorry, guys. You're going to have to bear with me. It's been a long week, and it's only Wednesday. James 4:4. I knew I'd find it. Adulterers and adulteresses, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Whoever therefore wants to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. God made it clear that the Israelites were supposed to be separated from the Egyptians. They weren't supposed to make treaties and intermarry. They were supposed to be separated from the Egyptians. But Solomon, in the effort to have peace, compromises. And remember that. It is never worth having peace in your life to make a compromise with the world. It is better to fight tooth and nail and have a fight your entire life with the world than to make a compromise Make a compromise with the world. Make a compromise with your flesh, because that compromise will eventually multiply. Compromises never stay the same size. They always grow. They never stay the same size. You let one compromise in your life, I'm going to compromise in this one area of the movies I watch, or I'm going to compromise in this one area of the conversations or coarse jesting, or I'm going to compromise one area in over here, and that multiplies, and that multiplies, and that multiplies. And by the end of Solomon's life, he has 1,000 wives. 1,000. He compromises, makes peace with the world. Don't make peace with the world. Fight and expose the wickedness. Don't make peace and compromise. Okay, chapter 3. There's a lot more to cover here. Don't marry into other with the nations around you. Okay. Oh, very interesting. Here. Oh no, that's for the next chapter. Okay, verses 3 through 15. The prayer of Solomon. And Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of his father David, except that he sacrificed and burned incense at the high places. He loved the Lord, but he did do a little sacrificing on the high places. And he married an Egyptian, and, he had some foreign wives, and he had some horses, and he wanted to have his hand holding the world and the other hand holding God, and it didn't work out. So he loved the Lord, but he did sacrifice on the high places. Now the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was where the great place was the great high place. Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on the altar. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon. Okay, so there was not a place to sacrifice, and so what happened is they picked a high place to sacrifice to the Lord, but God made some clear definitions, so their worship kind of looked pagan and kind of looked righteous, and obviously it's not good, because it says, except that he did sacrifice and burn incense at the high places. So he goes and makes a sacrifice to the Lord. The Lord appears to him in a dream, verse 5, and says, ask, what shall I give you? And Solomon said, you have shown great mercy to your servant David, my father, because he walked before you in truth and in righteousness and in uprightness of heart. With you have continued this great kindness to me, and you have given him a son to sit on the throne, as it is this day. Now the Lord my God, you have made your servant king instead of my father David, but I am a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in. He says, I'm an ignorant child. Lord, I need wisdom. Your servant is in the midst of your people, whom you have chosen, a great people, too numerous for me to number or counted. Therefore, give to your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil, for who is able to judge this great people of yours? Wow. What a wonderful thing to ask the Lord. And it profits him, and God gives him a promise, and the promise is, if you walk in my commandments, you're going to have a long life, but I'm going to give you wisdom. And where does this come from? Where did Solomon get this wisdom? Now, I recently was taught this by my dad. Who taught Solomon to ask this question? He's a kid. Who taught him to ask this question to the Lord? Lord, give me wisdom. Let me read you this. This was written by Solomon. Hear, my children, the instructions of a father, and give attention to no understanding. For I give you good doctrine. Do not forsake my law. When I was my father's son, tender and the only one in the sight of my mother, this is Solomon speaking, he also taught me and said to me, let your heart retain my words, keep my commandments and live. Get wisdom, get understanding. Do not forget nor turn away from the word of my mouth. Do not forsake her, and she will preserve you. Love her, and she will keep you. Wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore, get wisdom. And in all you're getting, get understanding. Now, what does he ask from the Lord? He says, therefore, give to your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this great people of yours? So he literally asks exactly for what David said. This is the primary thing. This is what you need. Get this. Okay, verse 6. Okay, so the Lord says, because you didn't ask for a long life and because you didn't ask for riches, I am going to give you wisdom, but I'm also going to give you those other things too. But there's a key verse here, verse 14. So, if you walk in my commandments, if you walk in my commandments to keep my statutes and my commandments that your fathers David walked, then I will lengthen your days. Then Solomon awoke, and indeed all had been a dream, and he came to Jerusalem and stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, offered up burnt offerings, peace offerings, and made a feast for all his servants. That's interesting. They did make sacrifices at the temple there. So I'm not sure why I was making a sacrifice here. So God gives him a if you walk in my ways and keep my commandments. It's exactly what King David said. And it's the same thing for us today. Now, the next section here, we're going to summarize. It's the story of the two harlots that both have a son. One of them kills their son. It's a horrible story. One of them smothers their son in the night. The other one doesn't. And then the other one wakes up and goes and switches the kids. And they come to Solomon and say, whose kid is it? We can't decide. It was too young to tell. And so Solomon says, I know. We'll cut the kid in half, and we'll give each of them a half. That way they each get half a kid. And the woman that already lost her son said, that's a great idea. And the woman that hadn't lost her son said, no, just give my son to her. I would rather he live. And then that's how Solomon discerned. And, pretty smart. So that's summarize of that section, verse 28. And all of Israel heard of the judgment which the king had rendered, and they feared the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was in him to administer justice. So the people of Israel saw that God had given him amazing wisdom. Okay, chapter 14. So Solomon was king over all of Israel, and so this is how he structured his government. He had there's a lot of names here of officers, the sons of Zadok the priest, and then there's 12 governors, and just he can't see everybody, and so he puts governors and then has them bring matters to him. I'm not going to really spend a lot of time on that. There's some other stuff that I really would like to get into. Let me make sure there's not anything. Verse 20, Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand by the sea in multitude, eating and drinking and rejoicing. Beware when you're eating and drinking and rejoicing. Make sure that you don't forsake the commandments of the Lord. That's not a bad thing. Eating and drinking and rejoicing is not a bad thing. But make sure you don't forsake the commandments of the Lord. You'll be tempted to. So Solomon reigned over all the kingdom from the river to the land of the Philistines as far as the border of Egypt. They brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life. Okay, do we have the expansion of Solomon's reign in Israel that we could throw up there really quick? The largest that the kingdom ever was under Solomon. Okay, so Solomon's kingdom at the beginning of his reign is in green. I don't know if you guys can see that. It's all the way down here. And then it expands all the way up into Hamath, Tifshah, all the way up into, this is modern day Syria, isn't it? All the way up into modern day Syria. He doesn't own Tyre and Sidon along the coast here, but he does own a big section of the coast here, from Gaza almost all the way to the tip of Tyre. So, big area. Moab, Edom. Before David, all of these were separate. Ammon, Moab, Edom. They were all separate. Oh, maybe not Edom. Separate nations. So, big land expansion without any fighting. We're going to find out how he did that. Okay, 11 princes, 12 governors. Okay, verse 22. Okay. If you want to find out how hungry Solomon was. Now Solomon's provisions for one day was 30 cores of fine flour, 6 cores of meal. Sounds like a recipe. 30 cores of fine flour, 6 cores of meal, 10 fatted calves, 20 oxen, quite a recipe, 100 sheep, besides the deer, gazelles, roebucks, and fatted fowl. They didn't have fowl, they had fatted fowl. They threw them grain or silver. So silver was as common as wood. So I don't think this is all that Solomon ate, but he was just saying like that what they sacrificed, what they butchered every day for Solomon and plus all of these people, all these governors, and he had a lot of wives. Let's see, 10 fatted oxen, 20 oxen from the pasture. So they had fatted oxen, 20 oxen that were a little less fat, 100 sheep, besides the deer, gazelle, robust, and I thought that was funny, and fatted fowl. These fowl are not fat enough. Give me some, only Solomon. These fowl are not fat enough. I want fatted fowl. Don't shoot anything unless it's a fatted fowl. Oh my goodness. Okay, so it gives his reign again from Tisha even to Gaza. Okay, let's see. Ooh. Solomon. Oh, Solomon. Remember the commandments of the Lord. Remember the commandments of the Lord and don't forsake them. And then your life will be long on the earth. Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots and 12,000 horsemen. Just a little compromise with the queen of Egypt. You know, she really is a good looker, and I really want to make peace with them. So just a little compromise. And then, just a little compromise with the horses. So Deuteronomy 17:16 says, speaking of the king, but he shall not multiply horses for himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt to multiply horses. For the Lord has said to you, you shall not return that way. Don't multiply horses, and specifically, don't get horses from Egypt. We're going to find out something here in a little bit. You may think that you're never going to desire something that the world desires. And you may think that, why would I want that thing that the world says I want? But if you go down the path of sin, you will want that thing that you thought you didn't want, because you're serving your flesh and not the Lord. So don't multiply horses, specifically not horses from Egypt. Okay, so he multiplied his horses. God gives him another command. God gives him another command here. And God gave Solomon wisdom, or maybe this is the wrong spot. And God gave Solomon wisdom and exceedingly great understanding. This is verse 29 of chapter 4. And largeness of heart like the sand of the seashore. He had compassion. Thus Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the men of the east and all the wisdom of Egypt. For he was wiser than all men, than Ethan the Ezrahite. I'd like to be, one of these guys. He was even wiser than these guys. Ethan the Ezrahite, never heard of him. He-Man. Now, I have heard of him. I have heard of He-Man. He was a pretty strong guy. Chalkal and Darda, the son of Maola. And his fame was in all the surrounding nations. So I guess that was the smart people, the Oxford graduates during their time. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. His songs were 1,005. 1,005. And he spoke of trees from the cedars of trees of Lebanon, even to the hyssops and the springs out of the wall. He spoke also of animals, of birds, of creeping things, and of fish. So he had wisdom of nature, of where the water came from, and how trees grew, and how does this fish and where does that animal go? Only things that God could show him. There's no way that he can know this. Only things that God could show him. And the men of all nations, from all the kings of the earth, who had heard of his wisdom, came to hear the wisdom of Solomon. Okay, so Tyre. Now, chapter 5. Now Hiram, king of Tyre, sent to Solomon and said, your dad was good to me. I want to be good to you. Bless the Lord. And they talk back and forth, and Hiram says, okay, I would like to give you some cedars to help you build your temple. And then Solomon says, okay, I'll give you this wheat and this food. And Solomon gave Hiram 20,000 cores of wheat as food for his household and 20 cores of pressed oil. Thus Solomon gave to Hiram year by year. So they make this trade. You give me the cedars, I'll give you the oil and the wheat. And by the way, Israel is a excellent place for growing olive oil. Excellent place. So it was a national commodity there. Okay, then King Solomon, verse 13, raised up a labor force. Oh my goodness. Wow, I need to go faster. He raised up a labor force and sent them to Lebanon. They split them up into three groups. I believe there was 30,000 men, 3 groups, 10,000 every 3 months. Let's see, 2 months. 10,000 every 2 months. They switch back and forth. And the huge stones for the temple, and prepared the timbers and the stones to build the temple. So the temple is built. Can you throw up a picture of the temple there, Jay? Oh, what you have there? Was that the travel of the... Okay. Okay, so Tyre is way up here. Way up here. If you ever wondered where tires came from, it's way up here. And so they would ship them down with boats to Joppa, and then they'd haul them to Jerusalem. And so this is where the cedars came from to build the temple. They didn't have very many. Jay, did they have any of the remnants of the cedars of Lebanon when you went there? I'm pretty sure Dad was saying that they're pretty much all logged, but this was like Douglas County. This was the logging port for this whole area. If you wanted to get cedar, you got it at Tyre. They brought it down to the temple to build in Jerusalem Solomon's house and the house of the Lord. As you can imagine, that's quite a trek to get logs. That's amazing what they did with manpower to get the logs there and then craft them. Okay. So the temple is an amazing structure, and I wish I had more time to cover it. I really, really do. He built, everything was covered in gold, and the lavers that they had out in front were amazing. I could spend the rest of forever talking about the temple of God. And so instead of that, we have a picture here. This is a picture of Solomon's temple. Okay, so they have the altar for burnt offerings over here. They have the laver with the oxen. You can read about this if you want to read it. It's kind of wordy, but what you want to do is maybe look this picture up or take a screenshot of this, and then it'll clear it in your mind. Okay, so they have a laver here. They call it a C, and this is all brass outside. And then this is for washing. And then they have carts with little C's in them for washing. And then you go in through the Holy of Holies. You go in through here, and you enter into where the showbread would be, and then the lampstand, and all of that stuff, and then the altar of incense. And then behind that, behind a veil, was the Holy of Holies, covered by the wings of the cherubim, which we're going to find out the only thing that was left in the Holy of Holies was the Ten Commandments. Aaron's rod and the manna had been removed. But everything in here was covered in gold. Everything in here. And they had engravings of cherubim and of olive trees and of all sorts of, what was the other kind of? It's amazing. It's. I could spend the rest of the time just reading this, but I can't, because we got to get through it. Help me out, guys. What was the cherubim, and then what was the seraphim? But what was the trees? Palm trees, almonds, olive wood. Oh no, that was what the doors were made out of. Okay, I'm not seeing it right now. Palm trees. Palm trees and almonds, I guess. Cherubim and palm trees and almonds. So he has all this engraved and carved inside, and it's all gold, and it's beautiful. It's absolutely gorgeous. But here's the thing. It took olive wood. Thank you, Jay. It took 7 years. Verse 38, actually 37. In 4 years, the foundation of the house was laid, and in the month of Ziv, and in the 4th year, this was laid. In the 11th year, which is the 8th month, the house was finished in all its details according to all its plans. So he was 7 years in building it. The very next verse, read the very next verse. But Solomon took 13 years to build his own house, so he finished all his house. Solomon did an excellent job building the Lord's house. He did an amazing job building his house. The chapter that we just read is 38 verses in description of the Lord's house. The chapter describing Solomon's house is 51 verses, and it is packed full. I wish that we could go through it. This guy was filthy rich. He does the bronze lavers. He has rectangle windows, which was crazy. And they go into detail of the trim around the windows and how amazing the trim was. And the pillars in his house were spectacular. He took 12 oxen, 3 looking towards the north, 3 looking towards the west, 3 looking towards the south, and 3 looking towards the east, and put a laver there. And he put wash basins in his house, kind of like the temple. Well, exactly like the temple. And let's see. He made 10 lavers of bronze, and each laver contained 40 baths, and each laver was 40 cubits, one each of the 10th. Of a 10th cart was a laver. He really liked baths. You're in a hot country, you need baths everywhere. He had baths everywhere. 400 pomegranates. Okay. 2 pillars, 2 bowls, bowl-shaped capitals that were on top of the 2 pillars. 400 pomegranates for 2 net worths. 2 rows of pomegranates, each net worth. I'm not sure what that is. Along these pillars, 10 carts, 10 lavers, huge sea with the 12 oxen on it. Holding it up. It goes on and goes on and goes on. I totally misread that, guys. Please forgive me. I was reading that section was about the temple of the Lord. I totally misread that. Please forgive me. Okay, so the temple had the 12 oxen, and then the showbread and the 10 carts. But Solomon's temple was 13. That's what I wanted to make clear. Solomon's temple was 13 years in building, and the temple of the Lord was 7 years in building. And we don't want to leave out the special room for Solomon's wife. And the house where he dwelt had another court inside the hall of like workmanship. Solomon also made a house like this hall for Pharaoh's daughter, whom he had taken as wife. So he has his own house, and his wife has a completely separate house. Sounds like a great marriage. And all these were of costly stones, cut to size, trimmed with saws, inside and out, from the foundations to the eaves, and also on the outside and in the great court. The foundation was of costly stones, large stones, some 10 cubits and some 8 cubits. 10 cubits. These stones are 10 cubits. The cubit's 3.5 feet. 3.5 feet? 18 inches. Okay, so help me out. My brain is fried. 18 inches times 10. 15 feet. A 15-foot rock, square. I mean, some of the stones they moved, and then for the temple also, were just massive, and they moved them by hand. Okay, so we have to go on. I wish that we could spend more time talking about the temple, but here's a summary. Okay, so we got the temple here with its bronze lavers. Again, I apologize about that. Was totally my mistake. The bronze lavers and the wheelbarrows were talking about the temple, not Solomon's house. So we have the temple here with the bronze lavers, and then Solomon's house was right next to it. You have a court, and look at the size of Solomon's house compared to the temple. Big house. And then, you always put your wife's house in the very back. It just cracks me up that she gets her own house. And then the hall of the pillars. This is all in there. It's just really a lot to read. If you're interested in an amazing structure, go ahead and read it. And if you like math, go ahead and read it. Okay, we're going to move on. Chapter 8. The ark returns. Okay. Chapter 8, they bring the ark of the Lord out of the tabernacle for hundreds and hundreds of years. The ark of the Lord has been in the tabernacle, and they bring it into the temple of the Lord. And they have sacrifices, and they let's see. Verse 5. And King Solomon, all the congregation of Israel who were established with him, were with him before the ark, sacrificing sheep and oxen that could not be counted or numbered for multitude. There was so many sheep and so many oxen sacrificed that they could not be counted in multitude. Now, we think about this as a nice, lovely scene. But oxen and sheep have a lot of blood, and they stink when they get burned. And so this was a stinky, bloody scenario. But they were sanctifying the temple to the Lord, and you read through the Old Testament in the sacrifice of the Lord. It was not pretty out here. It was not pretty. The reason they had all these wash basins was to wash. They were killing things and burning them all on the altar, and they were supposed to catch the blood, but if you've ever slaughtered an animal, when you kill them, they start flailing, and I'm sure that this place was just covered in blood. Okay, oxen and sheep without number for multitude. The priest brought it to the ark of the covenant of the Lord in its place, set it in its place, and the 2 cherubim wings were over top of it. Now, verse 10, and it came to pass, when the priests came out of the holy place, that the cloud filled the house of the Lord, so that the priest could not continue ministering because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. Okay. So Solomon preaches a sermon to the people of Israel and says, the Lord has dwelt in the darkness of the cloud. I have surely built you an exceedingly great and an exalted house and place for you to a place for you to dwell. Then the king turned around and blessed the whole assembly of Israel, while all of the assembly of Israel was standing. And he said, Blessed be the Lord God of Israel, who spoke with his mouth to my father David, and has fulfilled this, saying, Since the days I brought you out of Egypt and out of Israel, I have chosen no city from any tribe of Israel which is to build a house, that my name might be there. But I choose David to be over my people Israel. And he goes on about the great works of the Lord. Solomon's prayer, really quick. And he said, Lord God of Israel, this is verse 23, there is no God in heaven above or on earth below like you, who keep your covenant and mercy with your servants who walk before you with all their heart. You have kept what you promised your servant David, my father. You have both spoken with your mouth and fulfilled it with your hands, as it is this day. Solomon is proclaiming that God kept his promise to David and that his son would build the temple. Now, if you want to know where the plans for the temple came from, you can find them in Second Chronicles. Let me find it here. I wrote it down. Oh, 1 Chronicles 28, 11 through 19. David actually plans out the temple. He wasn't allowed to build it, but David actually plans it out. It's in 1 Chronicles 28, 11 through 19. An interesting note, Solomon did not design the temple. David did. He wasn't allowed to build it, but he wasn't kept from designing it. Okay, so Solomon goes on and says that when the children of Israel are defeated in battle because of their sin, let them come back to the temple. When they have drought because of their sin, let them come back to the temple and be renewed to the Lord because of famine and because of captivity. And then all of Israel rejoices, and they sacrifice another 22,000 bulls and 120,000 sheep, if they hadn't done enough already. 22,000 bulls and 122,000 sheep. Okay, chapter 9. Okay, verse 4 through 9. God reminds him in a vision. He appears to Solomon and he reminds him, don't walk away from me. Keep my commandments. Verse 4, now if you walk before me as your father David walked, in integrity of heart and in uprightness, do according to all that I have commanded you, and if you keep my covenant and my judgments, then I will establish the throne of your kingdom over Israel forever, as I have promised David. Keep the commandments. But if you and your sons all turn from following me and do not keep my commandments and my statutes which I have set before you, but go and serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel from the hand which I have given them. And this house which I have consecrated for my name, I will cast out of my sight. He says I'm going to cast the temple out. Israel will be a proverb and a byword among the people. And as for this house which is exalted, everyone who passes by it will be astonished and will hiss and say, why has the Lord done thus to this land and to his house? God's like, I don't care about the temple. I want you guys to be holy. So he says, specific, then they shall answer, because they forsook the Lord their God and brought their fathers out of the land of Egypt, and have embraced other gods and worshipped them and served them. Embraced other gods, worshipped them, and served them. God says, don't do that. Keep my commandments. If you want to keep the blessing of the Lord, keep his commandments. Okay, so Tyre, the king of Tyre and the king of Solomon trade some cities. And then, verse 19, in chapter 9 another compromise. All, verse 19, we'll start there. All the storage cities that Solomon had, cities for his chariots and cities for his cavalry, and whatever Solomon desired to build in Jerusalem and in Lebanon and all the lands of his dominion, all the people who were left of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, who were not of the children of Israel, what were they supposed to do with them? They were supposed to utterly decimate them. They were supposed to cast them out of the land. That is, their descendants who were left in the land after them, whom the children of Israel had not been able to destroy completely. From these Solomon raised forced labor to this day. Solomon says, I don't want to kill these people. They're going to be slaves, which is not what the Lord said to do. Another compromise. Chapter 24. Verse 24. But Pharaoh's daughter came up from the city of David to her house, which Solomon had built for her. Then he built Milo, which was basically a recycling plant. Now 3 times a year Solomon offered burnt offerings and peace offerings on the altar which he had built to the Lord. He burnt incense there on the altar, and he finished the temple. King Solomon also built a fleet of ships and acquired gold, and it goes on. Lots and lots of gold. Now we're going to get into Queen. Chapter 10, we're going to talk about the Queen of Sheba. The Queen of Sheba comes down because she hears about Solomon's wisdom, and she asks him a bunch of questions, and she's just amazed at his wisdom. And so she gives him a gift, and gives him, so the King Solomon gave the Queen of Sheba all she desired, whatever she asked, so they exchanged gifts. Verse 18. Moreover, the king made a great throne of ivory, like he didn't have a good enough throne already, and overlaid it with pure gold, because that's what you do with pure ivory. You overlay it with pure gold. Literally, this guy had more money than he knew what to do with. So he has 2 lions on each side of the armrest, and 12 lions stood there, one on each side of the 6 steps, golden lions. This guy was so rich. Now, verse 24, now all the earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put in his heart. Each man brought his present, article of spices or silver or gold, and at a set rate. And Solomon gathered chariots, verse 26, and horsemen. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen, whom he stationed in the chariot cities and with the king at Jerusalem. The king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones, and he made cedar trees as abundant as cypress. Verse 28, this is crazy. And Solomon had horses imported from Egypt. He had the horses that he was getting weren't good enough. And remember I said that you will eventually desire what the world desires. The horses in Egypt are the best horses, even though God said, don't send people down to go get horses from Egypt. He sends horses in specifically from Egypt. Why? He gives up his eternity for temporary earthly pleasures. And what does that sin ultimately lead you to when you give that compromise to the Lord? You give that compromise, to the world. You give that compromise to the world. I want a little more horses, a little more wives, a little more satisfaction of the flesh. It leads you to chapter 11, and that's where we're going to end tonight. But King Solomon loved many foreign women, as well as the daughter of Pharaoh. So as well as the daughter of Pharaoh, got to throw that one in. Women of the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Edomites, the Sidonites, and the Hittites. Exactly what God said not to do. We read it. Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 7:3. Don't intermarry with the people of the land. The Edomites, the Sidonites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Moabites, he does it. He says, for the nations of whom the Lord had said to the children of Israel, you shall not intermarry with them, nor they with you. Surely they will turn away your hearts after their gods. Solomon clung to these in love. He could not control himself. He clung to them in love. And he had 700 wives, princesses, princesses, and 300 concubines. And his wives turned away his heart. This guy had 1,000 wives. I don't think he was clinging to them in love. I think he was clinging to them in lust. Remember, your sin has an effect on your children. Write these down. Exodus 34:7, Numbers 14:8, Jeremiah 32:18. I'll say it again. Exodus 34:7, Numbers 14:8, Jeremiah 32:18. For the sake of time, I'm not going to read all of them, but I do want to read one, and that is Exodus 34:7. Remember what David's sin was. He went out on the roof and he desired Bathsheba and committed adultery with her. Exodus 34:7. This is in the description of the Lord's name. God shares his name to Moses, and this is part of his name. Keeping mercy to thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin. By no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquities of the fathers upon the children and the children's children, to the third and fourth generation. David was forgiven of his sin, but that didn't mean that Solomon didn't have to deal with the struggle that David had. Solomon just gave into it and had 1,000 wives. What did the wives do? Exactly what the Lord said they would do. The Lord said, don't go down to Egypt and get their horses, and don't multiply your wives, because they're going to turn your hearts away from the Lord. So it was, when Solomon was old, that his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not loyal to the Lord his God, as was the heart of his father David. David's heart was loyal to God. He repented of his sin and followed the Lord. Solomon did not. Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord and did not fully follow the Lord, as did his father David. Then Solomon built a high place to Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, on the hill that is east of Jerusalem. Oh, I skipped a verse. Sorry. For verse 5. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Amorites, and then Chemosh of the Moabites, and then Molech, the abomination of the people of Ammon. So Molech, Chemosh, and Milcom, what I researched, were all kind of the same god. And they all were gods that you sacrificed your children to. And then the other god, the Ashtoreth, is the goddess of fertility, the sex pleasure god. Isn't that amazing? Those two go together. The sex pleasure god and the kill your children god, false gods, have whatever amount of sexual pleasure you want, and go ahead and kill your children on these altars. Isn't that exactly what we deal with today? Isn't that what this world has come to? You could write down here, lewdness, pornography, and Planned Parenthood. You just implement a different name for these gods. So if you think that if you had just the right amount of wisdom and the right revelation from God and the right amount of money, you would follow the Lord, don't be deceived, because Solomon had all those things and he fell away from the Lord because he let compromises into his life. Okay, I need to go on here. So the Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned from the Lord God of Israel. God did everything for Solomon. God gave him everything, and he turned away from the Lord, and had commanded him concerning these things, and he should not go after other gods, but he did not keep what the Lord had commanded. Therefore the Lord said to Solomon, because you have done this, and have not kept my commandment and my statutes, which I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you, and give it to your servant. Nevertheless, I will not do it in your days. For the sake of your father David, I will tear it out of the hand of your son. Solomon sinned against the Lord, but David had a promise from God that his son's kingdom would be a peaceful kingdom. And so the covenant that God made to David is what saved Solomon here. Okay, so the chastisement, all these years of peace, and then rebellion starts by the hand of Hadad, an Edomite, and by the hand of Zeron, and then the final one is the one that actually becomes the king of the northern tribes, Jeroboam. They all start rebelling against the king. Verse 41 of chapter 11, this will end. Now the rest of the acts of Solomon, all that he did, and his wisdom, are they not written in the books of the acts of Solomon? And the period that Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel was 40 years, the same as his father. Then Solomon rested with his fathers and was buried in the city of David, his father, and Jeroboam, his son, reigned in his place. Okay, so I know that I have gone long, and I ask you to bear with me, but there are some things that we cannot pass over here. Solomon had a revelation from the Lord. He obviously had a relationship with God. God spoke to him. God gave him commandments and blessed him. But he let sin take root in his life. He let a compromise with the world take root in his life by the means of marrying Pharaoh's daughter, sacrificing on the high places, and multiplying horses. That grew and grew and grew and grew until it completely killed him. And he no longer followed the Lord. He followed Ashtoreth and Molech. Study for yourself what those two gods are, those false gods. They're horrible. And it was all because he let a compromise in his life. Don't let compromises in your life. Fight, contend. Don't be a friend of the world. That's what Solomon's life was a friend of the world. And I want to read James 4:4 again. Now that we've gone over the life of Solomon, maybe this will resonate a little bit more. Adulterers and adulteresses. That's what Solomon was. He was an adulterer and an adulterer. He had adulterated against God. He was worshiping Ashtoreth and Molech. He was adulterating against God. Do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? You cannot be God's friend and the world's friend. Whoever therefore wants to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. Solomon probably didn't want to necessarily be an enemy of God, but he wanted to be friends with the world. Therefore, he had to be an enemy of God. Don't be deceived. In Ephesians, for those of us that are tempted and are just tired of the fight with the world, tired of fighting every day and wanting to make a compromise, just let's make a treaty. Let's make a treaty. I'll marry your daughter and we can just be happy, and that'll fix everything. No. Paul has some words. Finally, brethren, this is Ephesians 6:10. Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts and wickedness in heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day. And this is what I want us to take home. And having done all to stand, After you've done all to stand against the world, stand therefore, having girded your waist with truth. And then he goes down through the list of the armor that you put on. After you've done all to stand, and you think, oh, I just want to compromise and give a little bit of my life to the world. Stand therefore, put on the whole armor of God, and don't compromise, because you'll end up like Solomon. You'll end up being a friend of the world, and you'll be alienated from God. It is a very good likelihood that the wisest man on earth, besides Jesus Christ, ended up in hell because he had a friend in the world, and it created in him enemies of God. Don't do it. Don't do it. Compromise does not stay the same size. It grows. What did Jesus say? A little bit of leaven, and the whole lump is leavened. Okay. Thank you so much for being patient with me. I'm sorry that we had difficulties in the beginning, and I went a little bit long, but I really didn't want to pass over that. Such a good lesson. Don't compromise and don't be friends with the world. Otherwise, you'll end up like Solomon. So, really quickly, we'll go over our outline again. Key verse. Oh, I didn't read that. I need to read that really quick. Key verse. You know what? We've gone too long. I'll read it next session. The key verse is 1 Kings 9, 3 through 7. And if you read that, it's God saying, I will bless you. If you keep my commandments, I will bless you. But you got to keep my commandments. If you guys wouldn't mind, go ahead and read that on your own time. I don't want to keep you any longer. Read that on your own time soon so you can get the feel of it. And we covered this section tonight. Prayer for wisdom, temple construction, and pagan corruption. Don't forget, don't be friends with the world. And next week we'll cover 12 through 22. Okay, thank you very much.